Uh, Good morning. How are you guys doing today? Hi. I'm like super nervous to be up here because I feel like I'm a beginning coach too, even though this is year 7 for me. And so when Miss Ling was like, "We have a veteran here," I was like, "Oh, they're gonna expect me to be good at stuff." So my name is Chris Carroll. I am the coach of a team called the Flaming Llamacorns. If you can't tell, I'm a little eccentric. I've got a pink shirt and bright orange shoes on. No, my wife did not approve my outfit this morning. She was still sleeping. I left at 5 o'clock this morning. So, this QR code, just by the way, brings up this slideshow. So, if you are curious, if you want this slideshow, this is a QR code that just pulls up this exact slideshow. So, it's like Inception, slideshowception, I guess. Uh, just so I'll give you guys like just a few seconds, and then I think Elaine might send this out to everybody also when we're done. So if you don't get it or whatever, don't worry, we'll get it figured out. I promise. Okay, so to give you an idea of who I am a father of 4. I've been teaching for 11 years, including 6 years in robotics. This will be year 7 for me, or I've taught robotics in a middle school setting. I've been to state 4 times for First Lego League. There's a competition that is sponsored by NASA that is run over at NAU. It's called Artemis Roads. And we were the grand prize winner. We got a trip to Florida for my not me, my team, not for me. I just good job. And I love making stuff. I love 3D printing. I'm like a huge nerd. This is my team that went to Florida. One of the Flaming Lomacorns teams we've had. Um, I love making stuff. My son, he broke his elbow, and we were trying to come up with a creative solution for how to make him a Halloween costume with a broken elbow. And so we settled on Lumiere from Beauty and the Beast, because that was the only position he could put his hand in. So, um, what I want to do right now is I'm going to build a robot that I call Spiky. It's a 2-minute robot. So this QR code pulls up a YouTube tutorial that I made on how to build Spiky. I'm not going to go through the whole tutorial. What I really would like is for someone to pull up a stopwatch, and we're going to time me and see how long it takes for me to build Spiky. Okay? This is a very, very basic robot that can be built in. I don't know. I've actually never, I call it a 2-minute robot, but I've never actually timed myself. So this is going to be an interesting experience. You guys ready? Sometimes have it? When you're ready, somebody count me down and I'll go as fast as I can. Yeah, you please do. Oh, stop sharing. Stop share. Okay. Count me down. Got it. All right. So I've got 8 black pegs that I've got to get organized in just the right spot. They go across the top and down the 2 sides. You know which one is the top and which one is the bottom, because you guys know what a button is? It's on the butt on the robot. So the button is the butt of the okay. Wasting time here, Carol. All right. Hustle, motors, attached, axle. Ah, my hands are shaking. Okay. Wheel, wheel, dial to secure the wheel. And then I've got a ball bearing I've got to attach. Oh my gosh, I'm running out of time. Put this on. I'm so sorry. I'm totally messing up you guys' stream. So the ball bearing goes on the back to balance the robot. Okay, plug this bad boy in. Let's see now. What's my time?
1 minute and 10 seconds.
I'm hustling. This on here, right there. And then I got a color sensor. There's so much that goes on this robot, and it's just very, very simple. Alrighty. Okay, now I'm not gonna have time to do the fun cable management stuff, but I plug this in here. I got a robot. I'm big button. 8 seconds to spare. So this is what I call it a 2-minute robot because once you know how to build it, it's very, very fast, very, very simple. The video that I made is like 5 minutes long, and it's just a simple tutorial. This is probably not going to win you FLL state, if I'm being perfectly honest, right? But this is a very good robot that I use in my classes almost every day, and I love it because I can put it together and take it apart in the same session. I don't have to spend 45 minutes just putting something together so I can show my students how to basically program a robot. I have a microphone. What am I yelling for? So you also have these little guys that are used for cable management. You don't have video, that's not that big a deal. The only reason why I even mention it is because these little clips just help to keep your wires organized. You never want your wires to get caught up in your wheels. That's going to lead to not only can it break your motors, but it's also going to make your run inaccurate, which is like arguably worse. All right. That's what I should use my 8 seconds on. All right. Okay, so here is Spucky. Very, very simple, basic robot. Now I can go back to sharing my screen. Is that okay? Well, just because I got to go to the next set of slides. Share screen. I mean, I think so. Okay. All right, so this is Spiky. Okay, very, very simple, basic robot. It has 2 wheels with motors, and it has a ball bearing on the back so that it can be programmed. I put a color sensor on the front. I'm going to show you why in just a minute. What else do you need to program these? You need something to program them with, so you need some sort of a Chromebook or an iPad or a laptop. You can use a PC even. You can use an iPhone. You can use Android phones too. There's all kinds of apps for all kinds of things. You just need something you can program with. But essentially, if you know anything about coding, which you might not, and that's totally fine, these run off of something that is called Scratch. If you know anything about Scratch-based coding, or if you kids have ever used Scratch.mit because you can make games on it, it's very, very similar type of coding. So the thing about robots is that they're not very bright, and they're very intimidating because you think that a robot is going to be incredibly difficult or complicated, and there's so many processes that it has to do, and it's high technology. And what we don't understand, what most people don't understand, is that robots are very dumb, very, very dumb. In fact, the reason why I say that is because they have no capacity for making decisions. Okay, if I'm walking and I see something in my way, I know to step over it, step around it, go around, pick it up off the floor. Robots don't know inherently how to do that. So if you program a robot to drive off of a table, it's going to drive off of that table. And it does not care that it's going to break and die and ruin itself. It doesn't know that it's going to do that because robots are incredibly dumb. So the idea behind a robot is that you have to teach it about itself before you can actually program it. I want to talk a little bit about what is a robot. So I have here a baseball. It's a Savannah Bananas baseball. It's banana ball, technically. It's a banana ball, technically. If you know anything about baseball, we're going to have a little discussion just really fast. What is a robot, and is a baseball a robot? Okay? What is a robot, and is a baseball a robot? So the idea here is somebody can raise your hand and tell me what is something that something has to have to be considered a robot in your opinion. What does it have to have? It has to follow directions, meaning it has to be programmable. You have to be able to program it and have it do something because of what you program. Yeah? Okay. What else makes a robot? Being able to process, as in change its behavior based on some sort of information that it receives. Okay, all right. What else? Okay, good. Does a robot have to be electronic? Give me an example of a robot that's not electronic. I heard a lot of no's.
Like a grandfather clock, I would say.
Okay, a grandfather's clock that works off of like a weight system, right? Okay, I like it. It definitely has a good escapement mechanism inside that runs it. I think about animatronics at Disneyland that are run off of air and pistons. Okay, they don't necessarily have to have electronics. They actually have different valves that open up and run air through pistons to make them move. So that's good. That's an idea. Okay, so back to my question: is a baseball a robot? So when I think about a robot, okay, I think about baseball. If you put two fingers on the top of these seams, this is called two-seam fastball, and you throw it, a two-seam fastball curves from inside to outside. If you've ever watched baseball, you can see a slight curve, it'll move a few inches, and then keep track of how far it's able to move. If I take these two fingers and put them on top of this seam, and I whip my fingers forward as I throw, it's a curve ball, and it's going to curve downward, a 12-6 curve ball, I call it, and it's going to curve downward. Based on the way that I hold the ball and the way that I put spin on it, it reacts in the air differently. Does that make a baseball programmable? Does that mean I can program a baseball? You see what I'm saying? So in that sense, can you say a baseball is a robot? Raise your hand if you think a baseball is a robot. We've already established that a robot does not have to be electronic, right? We've already established that it has to be programmable, which it is. It's reacting to the air around it. And in fact, if you go to different stadiums that are at different altitudes, the baseball reacts differently. So by changing the air pressure around it, you change how the baseball reacts. I will tell you, I do this activity all the time because I think it's really funny because I make everybody say that a baseball is a robot, but it's not. It's not a robot. Baseball is not a robot, and I'll tell you why. It's because of what you that said about it reacting like it has to analyze something. Who said that? So basically, was that you guys? Basically, here's what makes something a robot. Right? It has to be able to gather information, has to gather that information, analyze it, and then change its behavior based on that information. That's called sensory data. Basically, it means when we see something, we know to avoid it, right? That's how we act as robots sometimes. But a robot has to have some sort of a sensor, okay? So that's why baseball is not a robot, and robots are they're just really, really dumb. You have to tell them who they are. So here's what I use to program. This is what our Scratch-based software kind of looks like. All right. So the setup blocks, there's two different types of blocks, right? So you have the setup blocks, which is where you're teaching the robot how to be itself. And then you have the other blocks that program the robot to do something. Okay. So in this case, I have three blocks put in here. It says set movement motors to B, which on my robot, I prefer using B and C for the movement motors, but that's just me. I like to just keep that consistent. It doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter to the robot which ports you plug it into. I just prefer every robot that I build to use the same motors for movement because then I know it's always going to be B and C. It doesn't matter what the robot looks like. B is always the left motor. C is always the right motor. I prefer to do it that way because it makes it simple. There are certain configurations where you have to move things around because your wires aren't long enough or whatever. But if you can, I prefer to make my movement motors B and C. And then I put any attachments that I'm using in A. But you have 6 ports that you can plug stuff into, and it doesn't matter which port it goes into as long as you tell it which port you're using. So in this case, set movement motors to A and B. I actually am going to use B and C instead, but you can do it however you like. You set your movement speed. You're telling how fast the robot to go. You don't want the robot to try to go too quickly because it'll spin out or it'll have a hard time stopping and it leads to inaccurate movements. I try and keep my robot at 50% speed most of the time, but there are certain situations where you can speed it up, and that's a trial and error thing for your team. The faster it's moving, the less accurate it will be. So if you're doing something that doesn't require accuracy, ramp that speed up there. Who cares? But if you're doing something that has to be precise, sometimes we'll go down to 10% speed because we want the robot to be perfectly precise. Okay. And then the other thing is how far your robot moves in one rotation of the wheel. So these work off of rotations, right? So you can see I have this little dial right here. So what I do is I point it straight down, and then you want to see how far does your robot travel in one complete rotation. Okay. So the way that we do that is here's the thing, right? This is something that we want the kids to do, right? We don't us as coaches and parents and mentors, to answer someone's question from the earlier session is, what do we do if we don't know anything about coding? Great, because then you're less likely to cheat. Because me, it's more difficult for me because I know a lot about programming these robots. I do this for my job, right? So it's really hard for me to see a coding mistake and be like, that's wrong. It's gonna be a problem. But I have to leave it alone because it's for the kids to learn, right? It's for the kids to learn. So here's the activity that I do. Here's the activity that I do to teach my kids how to code their robot. I do something called the magic number problem. Okay. So the magic number is how far your robot travels in one 360-degree rotation of the wheels. So if your wheel moves around exactly one time, how far does it travel? And the way we do this is we put a tape line on the table right here, and then we set up the robot on that tape line. Now, remember that the tape line is like an inch thick, so I would pick an edge of the tape line, and I like to take those little pointers, and I can just put it right on the point, or if I have a flat spot on the front of the robot, I can line it up with the tape edge, however I want to do it. And then I'm gonna program on this iPad. You guys aren't really gonna see what I'm doing, but it's okay, I promise. Promise. But essentially, here's what you're gonna do. Oh, sorry.
No, you're
She's
good.
the best. She's the best. So essentially what we're gonna do is I'm gonna open up a new project on here. Maybe. And I'm gonna use what's called word blocks, which is the Spike Crimes Scratch-based software. And then I'm gonna put in my setup blocks. So like I said before, thank you. I'm gonna set my movement motors, and I like to use B and C, or C and D, sorry, C and D. And then I put in my movement speed, set movement speed to 50%. And then this one here, we're actually going to teach the robot what this number is. So we don't have to do that quite just yet. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put in this block that says move forward, and I'm going to say 5 rotations. Okay, let me connect to this really fast. Ursula's my girl right here. Ursula's my favorite. She's great. Okay, so I have Ursula lined up on the line, and I'm just going to push play. And the robot drives forward exactly 5 rotations. Now I can take a piece of tape and mark where it landed. And then I can measure exactly how far Ursula traveled in those 5 rotations. And then I take that number and divide by 5. Why do I do 5 rotations and not 1? So, okay, but you can divide by 1, you can't divide by 0. Why would I do 5 rotations instead of just 1? You find an average. You find that's the idea. You get an average distance because it's not going to be exactly to the 100th of a millimeter every single time, right? So getting an average distance, I will tell you this distance I think is 87.5 centimeters if you measure it perfectly. So they measure it, and then you say, okay, take that number, divide it by 5, and now that number becomes a magic number. Essentially, we're doing a linear equation. Here's all you do. You say, okay, measure how far you want to travel, 200 centimeters. And then you say, okay, if I want to go 200 centimeters, then I just take 200 divided by my magic number, and then that's how many rotations that I have to tell the robot to go that far, right? So if I were to turn this around and say, oh, okay, this is where my robot is, and I want it to go exactly that distance, then I can now take my rotations and say, okay, it traveled 87.5 rotations, or 87.5 centimeters divided by 17.5 centimeters, and I get it's exactly 5 rotations, which would make sense because it just did that distance the other direction, right? So it goes, and then it stops exactly where we wanted it to stop, right? So they do this activity. What I like to do is I put 2 lines on the floor, and I tell them that they can practice off of the floor as many times as they want to get that magic number perfect, but they get 1 try to get their robot to start on this line and land exactly on the other line. And I say, whoever gets closest in their 1 attempt gets a piece of candy. And they spend the whole day practicing until eventually they're able to get it to go and land exactly on the line on their first try. And that gives them a lot of accuracy in their stuff. Okay. So that's moving forward and backwards. You just tell it, if I wanted it to go backwards, I would just change this number to -5 rotations, and then it drives backwards. Or I can have it go 5 rotations, and then there's a little arrow, and I can tell it go backwards 5 rotations. Either way, okay? That's forward and backward. Ooh, magic. Okay, so that's that. Now, I think the next thing is going to be turning. Yeah, well, just because I can't remember what I'm supposed to come next. I don't necessarily need to share my I mean, I would like to though, probably. Okay, so that's the magic number. This type of navigation going forwards and backwards and measuring exactly by rotations, that's called dead reckoning. That's when you guess how far you need to travel based on a number of rotations. It's a linear equation where x equals your magic number. No, x equals the number of rotations, m equals your magic number. Anyways, all right. Doesn't matter. Great. You guys are awesome. Okay, so then I have like a little worksheet that the kids fill out, and they do that activity with the lines across the floor. Okay, the next thing is to teach the kids that when it's going forward and backward, it can stop at a specific spot. And that is stopping at a line, right? So in this scenario, I don't have to tell the robot how far to travel because I know that there's a red line there. So all I have to do is tell the robot to stop when it sees the red line. This is called a trigger. Okay, this is called a trigger. That's what I call it. Okay, so instead of giving it a specific set distance to travel, I'm going to say drive forward until you see a red line. Okay, and I should have put this up on. I did put it up there. This is great. I'm going to leave. I don't think that we need to video this part because this is the actual code that I'm going to use right. So set moving motors to C and D. Right, set the moving motors, set the movement speed, set the magic number. Okay. And then I just tell it, instead of move forward this many rotations, I just tell it start driving forward. And then I have a wait block. And I say wait until the color sensor sees red. And then what do I want it to do when it sees red? I want it to stop. Okay? So it's very logical. It's very linear. It goes right in a row. You say start driving. When you see red, stop moving. Okay, so I'm going to just push play. I don't know what color I see on the table. I'll talk about that in a second. I think I'm okay. So it's going to go forward, and it's going to wait till it sees red. And when it sees red, it stops. Yeah, so that way I don't have to know exactly how far that distance is. This is really helpful if you're trying to navigate to an obstacle and your robot is not starting at the same spot every time. Let's say that you complete a mission and your robot gets off course just slightly. Even if you're off by a centimeter, that could make a big difference in the long run, right? So being able to tell your robot to stop at a line as opposed to stopping in a certain number of rotations, very, very valuable. Very, very valuable. Okay, so that's as simple as it is. And this wait until block can be used with so many different sensors. You have distance sensors and you have touch sensors. Stop when something pushes this button. And then you put a button on the front, so as soon as it hits the wall, it stops, right? So you just have to figure out what trigger you want, and then you say, wait until this happens, and then stop. Okay. Great. Okay, so let's talk about turns. Talk about turn. So when I'm practicing turning, right, I want to give myself a regular interval. Okay. So what that means is I want to know how many rotations to do a 360-degree turn, how many rotations to do a 90-degree turn or a 180-degree turn. I want to give myself those specific benchmarks because otherwise your kids will do this. I call this the squinty tongue face. Right there. So the idea is if you don't know how far your robot needs to turn, or it's much easier to say go forward, turn right, go forward, turn left when they're trying to navigate a particularly difficult area. So if you know regular numbers like I needed to turn left exactly 90 degrees or exactly 45 degrees or whatever, it makes it much easier to navigate to these areas on the map. So how do I get a regular interval out of one straight piece of tape? So I start with 360 degrees. And there are two different types of turn that you can do. So this one is called the tank turn. The tank turn is when one wheel spins while the other one stays still. Think of this as like a pivot in basketball where one wheel doesn't move and the other wheel does. Okay, so think about where the location of your robot is when you do this, right? So if I drew a line straight down from the middle of me, straight down from my nose, that's where the center of my body is. When I turn, my body is in a different spot. The middle of my body is in a different spot than where it was. So keep that in mind as you're programming your robot to do a turn like this. The other one is called a sweeping turn, and that's when both wheels will move, but one wheel moves really slow and the other moves a little faster, and then you end up with a wide sweeping ink. Okay, does that make sense? There's another type of turn. I can't remember what I used to call it though. My brain is like not brainy, but essentially it's where you have one wheel turn forward and one wheel move backwards. And that way, the center of your body stays in the same spot as the robot turns. Does that make sense? Sometimes you want the robot to move forward as it's turning. Sometimes you want it to stay put. It just depends on the situation, right? So here's how we do it. Here's how we do it. In the pink blocks that we were just using for movement, there's also blocks that look like this, where it says move to rotation at, and then it has these two white ovals. What do you think these stand for? What they represent? What do you think?
Speed of them.
The speed of the wheel, right? So this is the left wheel and this is the right wheel. So if you want this, it sounds so backwards. If you want your robot to turn left, or your left, I guess. If you want your robot to turn left, you need the right wheel to move, right? Because the right wheel is going to make it turn left. So right wheel turns left, left wheel turns right, which sounds crazy, but is what happens. It's what happens. Okay? So that's how you would do this one. This controls the two wheels independently. This steering turn is a sweep turn. And what it does is it gives a turn based off of a percentage. So like a 100% turn is that spin that I was telling you about, where it jumps, one goes forward and one goes backwards at full speed, right? But then if you put it at like a 50%, that's where one wheel's not going to move and the other wheel is. If you put it at like a 10% speed, that's going to be a nice wide sweeping turn. Okay, so it becomes a larger radius circle that it draws, the lower the turning number. Does that make sense? So the lower the turning number, the bigger the circle that it's going to draw. The tighter the circle, the bigger the turning number. All right. So here's what I do. I take a piece of tape, I put it on the table, and then I set my robot down flat on that piece of tape. Now, my teams need to figure out how far to get this robot to turn. So here's what I do. I start with this. I go here and I say just 2 rotations. This is the left wheel, so the robot's going to turn right. Okay. So I pull up that block. Sorry. Okay, so I pull up that block. Well, that block doesn't exist anymore. That block doesn't exist anymore. We're going to use a different block. So sorry. Okay, so I know what I do. You might want to video this part because it's changed since last year when I did this last. So I apologize. So the pink blocks control the movement motors, but there is a blue block that is right above it. And the blue block controls one motor, one individual motor. So what I do is if I want the robot to turn right, I need the left motor to turn on. If I want the robot to turn left, I need the right motor to turn on. So I'm going to take a blue block. I'm going to take a blue block. This is motor C, which is the left motor, right? The left motor. And I'm going to tell it to turn on for 2 rotations. And I'm going to make sure that my speed is set kind of slow because I want it to be pretty accurate. So I'm put it 25% speed, and it's going to go for 2 rotations. And when I push play, so it didn't complete the full 360-degree turn. So I'm going to keep going with that until eventually I get a perfect turn. Once I figure out exactly how many rotations to get a perfect 360-degree turn, I can divide that by 2, and I get a perfect 180-degree turn. I can take that and I can divide it by 4, and I can get a perfect 90-degree turn, or a 45-degree turn, or a 22.5-degree turn. You want to get like relative. And so what you want to do is give your students the opportunity to find perfect numbers. It's so much easier than going, that's about 30 degrees, and then they have to guess. That's about 15 degrees, and they have to guess. It's way easier to have them figure out what that number is and say, okay, let's just only use 45-degree turns. And then they can always just double it for a 90-degree turn or quadruple it or whatever. So anyways, that's how we do that. Now, if you want to test whether or not it's a 90-degree turn, here's the hack, right? So you can buy a square, like at Harbor Freight. Anybody know a square that's shaped like a triangle, but it's actually called a square because it has a 90-degree angle on it, right? Or you can buy like a woodworking square that is a perfect 90-degree angle. You can do that, or you can say, what tools do I have at my disposal that have a 90-degree angle already built into them, right? So I can take this, line it up with my tape exactly, and then I can just grab another piece of tape and go along the other side. Sorry, it's okay. It's my fault. Now I have a perfect 90-degree angle, and all I did was just go along the edge of my lid, right? You can use a notebook, you can use a square if you want to make sure it's nice and accurate, protractor, however you want to do it is totally fine. But I like to put a 90-degree angle on there because then I can set my robot down exactly on that 90-degree angle, and then they can measure, does this 90-degree angle work? And they're just practicing, right? They're just practicing. I highly recommend not teaching them their very first robot programming experience on the game mat because it's very daunting And if they don't have success immediately, they're going to give up. So doing something like this where you can just have them go forward and they see the robot move for the first time. Wow, that was amazing. They get it to stop on that red line. Oh my gosh, did you see what I just did? That was incredible, right? And so giving them something that gives them small amounts of success at the beginning is going to be huge. And then they're learning how to program it. And if you as a coach don't know how to program it, that's okay. Because plenty of coaches don't know how to program because it's not the coach's job to program, right? So that's why it's great to have older members, even kids who have aged out, that can come and help mentor and help them troubleshoot, as opposed to having a coach come in and do everything for them. I won't name names because I think that's me, but I have seen in my years of doing First Lego League, I have seen coaches on the sidelines grabbing a laptop. Let's fix this code really quick. And as a coach, I understand the desire to want to help your kids to do better and perform better. You want them to get something out of that experience, but at the same time, like they need to be able to stand on their own successes and stand on their own failures as well. Because every time they would have failed, but you take that opportunity away from them, that's an opportunity they could have learned, and instead you just gave them the answer. And as a teacher, I know that's the wrong way to go about it. You just give them the answer, you're just regurgitating information, and then they're not going to grow from that experience. Okay, get off my soapbox. Sorry. Okay. Let me see. I don't know that I have much more, but let me look. You're the best, Leon. Thank you. Truly, you're great. Okay. Right. So this is what I said, right? So every robot that you build is going to have a different turning radius. So just because you build Spiky and you figure out the magic number for Spiky, doesn't mean that those same numbers are going to work for every robot that they build. This activity of learning the magic number, learning your turning numbers, getting those things written down in a notebook, that's something they're going to have to do with every robot they build. And if they change their design, they're going to have to do that activity again. It only takes about 20 minutes to do, but getting them in the practice of every time they make a change, make sure your magic numbers didn't change, right? So just keep that in mind as you're helping them do this. Okay. Now, when you have an attachment on the robot, this is where things get a little bit trickier out of hand. If you put an attachment on the robot, some sort of a lifting mechanism or a swing arm that's going to go and knock something over or lift something up, here's what happens all the time. Frequently, you program the robot and you say, let's just see what happens. I'll tell it to go one rotation. And when they program that lifting arm, it's only able to move a half a rotation before it gets stuck. So Spike Prime, they've kind of figured that out a little bit, that if it can't perform an action, it'll skip it and go to the next thing. And so it's a little more forgiving, but it's best practice to teach the kids, don't tell the robot to do something that it can't do. Because the old EV3 kits, you know what would happen? It's hilarious. It's really funny. Because the kids will say, my robot just stopped. I don't know what's going on. And it'll try and lift the arm, and then it sits there and just flashes. And you can literally see the robot going, and it will just keep going until it dies because it doesn't know how to skip that. It doesn't have the capability of processing and saying, hey, maybe I can't do that thing. No, it says, it told me to do that thing. I'm going to do that thing, even if it kills me. And it just keeps trying and trying and trying. The definition of insanity, right? So what I like to do whenever I program an attachment, I create something called a reset program. And every time I use the attachment, I use a reset program. So this reset program, you can see I have my setup blocks, right? C and D, 50% movement speed, 1 motor rotation. But then you see how it says move for 5 rotations, then run this attachment for a half a rotation, and then move back. Here's the problem, right? If it can't complete that full rotation, it's gonna get stuck. So what I do instead, is I create this reset program. So this reset program, what it does is instead of telling it to run for a certain number of rotations, I tell it to run for a certain amount of time. And so by telling it to run for 1 second, it's going to go all the way to its limit as far as it can go. And then once it gets stuck, it's only going to keep trying until 1 second has passed. And then it's going to stop what it's doing and go to the next part of the code. So you reset it by telling your robot's arm, go all the way up for 1 second. And then you say, now come back down exactly 32 degrees. Or come back down exactly this many rotations, whatever you want to do, right? And then that way you can precisely set your attachment arm somewhere that is going to actually work for whatever program you're trying to run. Okay. So this is an example. This is the program that I just showed you, right? Where it says to run half a rotation. Here's another thing that frequently happens is if your robot always works as long as your lift arm starts in the upright position, that's great. But what happens when the kids are in the middle of a run and they forget to reset that arm? Right? If the arm starts down and you know it's not going to work, they're going to make a mistake. And so you teach them, put in a reset program. That way, even if they forget to lift the arm up, it's going to automatically do it for them every time. Okay, so it's making the robot work for you. Okay, these are some quick troubleshooting things that I highly recommend you do every time you build a robot, right? So make sure that all of your axles, bricks, everything are pushed in as far as they will possibly go. If your wheels are not the exact same distance apart because they're sliding on that axle, it's gonna make a mistake, right? It's gonna be different and inaccurate. Okay. Also, anything that might be rubbing on it is going to cause you inaccuracies too. Make sure your robot is balanced. If you have too much weight on one side or the other, it's going to drift one way or the other. Okay. Add spacers. Make sure that wheels are not butted up against the robot. Add a little spacer on your axle to make sure that it has a little bit of a gap. That way you can push it all the way on and it's not going to rub or cause any issues. Okay. Clean the wheels, clean the wheels, clean the wheels. I keep microfiber cloths in all of my robot kits so that in between runs, the kids can wipe the wheels down and get all of the dust off the wheels, get all the dust off of the mats, because dust equals slippage. So it's going to slip on the mat if it has dust on. Double check where you plugged in your motors and sensors. A lot of times my students will come to me and say, Mr. Carroll, my robot's not moving. And I'll look at their code and they'll have their code programmed. Left motor is B, right motor is C, just like I trained them, but they have it plugged in to A and B or C and D or whatever. They have it plugged into the wrong port. So double check to make sure that your sensors and your wheels, motors, everything are all plugged into the proper port. Okay, this is my information. This is my email. That's my phone number. What the heck am I thinking giving out my phone number? Jeez. And then at the end of the slideshow here, because I gave you that QR code earlier, at the end of the slideshow, I have a worksheet that is the magic number worksheet that I give to my students when they're learning magic number. And then also the YouTube video that shows you how to build Spikey, which is just super fast robot. Okay, I used up most of my time. So do you guys have any questions for me in this sweltering hot room? I'm so sweaty. Yes, sir.
The question, maybe, but see, your kids like run their little thing, and the robot gets stuck like in the middle. Like, are they supposed to program it from stack to the one of the two little squares every time? How does that?
Yeah, so you can only touch your robot if it's off of the mat, right? Or in one of those launch areas, right? So if your robot is programmed to go out, but then it gets stuck on something and can't come back, if the kids grab it while it's on the field, you lose a precision token. Those precision tokens are worth points at the end of the match. Every time they have to interrupt the robot, they lose 1 precision. Yes, ma'am.
That's true. Do you have colors on the mat or this one has the color sensors?
Yeah, absolutely. So on the mat, you're gonna find there's some black and white lines that you can use the color sensor to either line up the robot on that line, or you can use it to tell the robot when to stop because you'll see a white line when it's time to stop or something like that. And the challenge is that there's so many different varieties of colors that it's sometimes hard for your robot to distinguish what color it sees. What's up?
So at the beginning of the presentation, you showed list of devices which can be used to code. So is there any recommended device like Chromebooks or Windows or iPad, which which work better than the others? That's number one. The second question is, I saw you operate from the iPad, the robot. So does your iPad have receiver or is Wi-Fi based? What's the mode of how do they connect? Is it Bluetooth?
It's Bluetooth. Yeah, so my iPad has Bluetooth. It's just an app that you download on here and it connects to the robot via Bluetooth. I like the iPads. I don't prefer them because it's touch control and I have fat fingers. And so sometimes it's hard to get little detailed things in there. I prefer using a laptop personally because laptops give you the ability to save directly to the device, whereas a Chromebook, as soon as you log off the Chromebook, all data is lost, right? So Chromebooks do work, but if you're going to use a Chromebook to do that, I would recommend using a jump drive and saving your programs onto the jump drive before you close it. Otherwise, you could end up losing days of work if you're not paying attention. iPads work great because they do save it directly to that device. They're just hard to navigate because I have fat fingers, which my kids all use iPads in competition too. So
I just wanted to, if you're using your school provided Chromebooks for your team on campus, because of the firewalls, it will not save programs. Our team last year lost program after program as soon as it shut down, so it hurts back. And so then you come back the next day, you got nothing. So we tried to jump drive in the Chromebooks. It would not do that because it didn't have a program to save on a jump drive. So the school Chromebooks, it would be better if you had your own personal Chromebook so that you could do that because the programs within the school.
I know
Be good.
my students also a lot of times will use Google Drive and they create a Google Drive folder that's shared between the team members so that they can upload the codes into the Google Drive. You just end up with sometimes they save multiple codes that all are similar to each other. And so you have to make sure they keep that clean and updated as they go. Anything else? Yeah.
I can add to our horror story. We had one, our Chromebooks in our school are locked down to the filtered version of the internet. We had them out using, set them up so they could use a hotspot at the microchip place and did it with Wi-Fi. And once that touched the outside world, we wanted to do a firmware update and both our robots, the Wavestone robots, at the channel at the qualifier. So I was running around pulling all the files from their Google Drive to reinstall.
Yeah, that's actually a big problem that Spike Prime has had in the past is if your robot is not updated to the most latest firmware, you can end up with an issue where it updates the firmware and you lose programs that have been saved on that robot. So making sure that you have programs saved in a secondary location so they're easy to just move back onto the robot is huge, huge. I prefer a laptop. Me personally, I prefer a laptop because I can use a mouse with it and I have more precision with clicking and moving and typing in numbers. But the iPads do work great and they're easy for kids to use, right? Like it's simple, it's small, it's lightweight, and they can bring it around everywhere. Although they can also leave them around everywhere, which is kind of annoying. And laptops are less likely to get just left on the table. So I prefer laptops personally, but the iPads, like I said, my students all use iPads when we program for our competitions. But I prefer them. Not at the same time. Not at the same time. So you can only use one robot for that competition, but I have seen it where you have two groups and one group builds a robot, and one group builds another, you get 3 runs. And so sometimes they'll run one robot in one run, and then the other half will run a different robot in another run. I've seen teams do that because they're trying to see which of the robot designs can get a better score. But you can only use one robot at a time.
I have a very good question again. So two things. First, during the competition, the students are allowed to use that tape to put on the, is that what you're saying, or is that just for practice? And the second is, those spots, where the robot starts, are those determined, can they use a tape measure or how does that go?
So you would figure that out during practices. That's why you would get your practice field kit and set it up, because all of the mission models are set up on Velcro so that they're in the same spot every time, or pretty close to the same spot every time. But it is important to remember that just because it worked at home doesn't mean it's going to work at the competition. In fact, it's like Murphy's Law. It's almost guaranteed to not work when you get to competition. So that's why they have practice fields set up at the tournaments, so that you can test your programs and check and make sure that everything is still working the way you intended it to.
Are they safe?
On the practices they can.
Competition.
In the actual competition, they would not they can't do anything like
What
that.
about tape measure?
Not during the
Okay,
competition.
thank you. Sir.
Yeah.
But they can build a placement with the Legos. That is part of.
A jig. Yeah, they call that a jig. So say you want your robot to be exactly 30 degrees turned from the wall, and you have some sort of a Lego built jig. You can set that down and put your robot against it, move the jig out of the way, and push play. You can do that. You just can't. It just has to be officially Lego licensed, and it has to all fit within your starting area when you start the program. You've been waiting a long time. Sorry.
So you did everything with like Scratch. Part of what I want to teach the kids is like Python or like intro to Python. Have you tried that or?
Yeah, it's really hard. So it's not that bad. They have a database. They have a Python database built into the software, and so it would be like, if you want your robot to drive forward, here's the blocks that you would put in, and you can literally copy and paste it, and then change the values. So it is possible, and there's more functionality when you use the Python as opposed to using the Scratch. For example, the color sensor can read how much light that it can see, but it can also read something called ambient light. So the way the color sensor works is it shines the light down and then measures how much light's coming back at it. But if you point it upward, it can measure how much light is coming in from the outside world. So for example, you could tell if you were inside of a cave or outside of a cave based on how much light it's receiving. But that functionality only exists in Python and not in Scratch. So there are things that you can unlock with Python, but I have found Python to be a little difficult, but there are some really good teams that use Python a lot.
The presentation, do we find that anywhere?
This presentation, I'll give you a QR code. I think that Elaine said she was going to send it out, but I have a QR code that is a link to this presentation.